Hi, this is Sergeant Betsy Brandner Smith with the National Police Association, and this is the National Police Association podcast. I have a fascinating guest with me today, and not only is he fascinating, but boy, is this timely. So we have so much to talk to this guest about. He is retired NYPD, but he's also an author, and he's also a student of what is happening in this country, especially as it relates to law enforcement. So I thought this would be the perfect guy to bring in. Detective Vic Ferrari, welcome to the show.
Betsy, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So before we start talking about current events, the first thing I have to ask is what I ask everybody who's a cop who comes on this show. Why'd you become a cop?
Born and raised in the Bronx, New York City kid. Always, I wanted to be a police officer from the age of 5, growing up watching the 7 Ups, the French Connection, the Rockford Files. I always tell the story. My mom would take me to the movie theater on Saturdays. It was around the corner from an NYPD police station. So instead, I was more interested in the cops and the police cars than Herbie the Love Bug Part 2. By age 11, 12 years old, my friends and I would sneak into the local post office and steal FBI wanted posters off the wall and conduct manhunts around the neighborhood. I knew what I wanted to do. By 20, I took the exam. By 21, I went into the New York City Police Academy, and I had a wonderful 20-year career with the NYPD.
So you ended up as a detective. The NYPD is such a huge organization, and of course, it's such a huge city. What did you focus on as a detective?
Well, you're right. That with 40 at my time, I think it was about 45,000 NYPD members. So there's a ton of specialized units. I grew up in a neighborhood where stealing a car was a rite of passage. No, I wasn't a car thief, but I worked in a gas station, and there was always guys trying to sell stolen cars, get us to repair the stolen cars. So I always had a leg up. I was always the guy in the precinct that was getting into car chases and finding stolen cars. So my last 10 years, I was a detective in the NYPD's auto crime division. So chop shops, exporting stolen vehicles out of the country, changing vehicle identification numbers on stolen cars for resale, a lot of organized crime cases.
So you, like me, were very influenced by television. That's kind of our generation, right? That's exactly why I'm a cop. And I always tell people that you got to go back to when we only had a few television channels, and most of the cops, most of the television shows were cop shows or doctor shows, and
Yeah.
I love that. Looking now at as how the NYPD is portrayed on network television, give me your thoughts on that.
Oh, it's total nonsense. I can't watch. I mean, I have watched police shows before, but especially as when you've done it for 20 years and then you see the nonsense on television, nothing can be further than truth. And you know this, Betsy. God forbid you get into a shooting. You're not at the bar 15 minutes later, yucking it up with your friends. You know you're going to get run past the grand jury, and hopefully you don't get indicted. So there's a lot of they speed things up. I get it. The only police show that really kind of gets it somewhat right about the NYPD is Law and Order, because in the beginning of the show, a crime is committed, right? The cops come, the detectives come, they start an investigation. There's going back and forth with the DA's office. Do we have enough to lock this guy up? And then it gets wrapped up in a bow with a bow on it within an hour. But Law and Order is probably the closest thing.
My daughter will be happy to hear that because she is a Law and Order freak.
Okay.
She watches them all. So I have to look at your 20-year career. I mean, 20 years in the NYPD is like 40 years, in other agencies. You retired, you went on to other things, and then you decided to sit down and write a book. How do you come to that?
I was bored out of my mind. I retired from the NYPD. I became a cop in Florida. I absolutely hated it. I went from, working in America's largest police department, working on organized crime cases, to Reno 911. And I said, oh no, I can't do this. So I re-retired. And my friends and family are like, you got a good sense of humor. You've got all these stories. Why don't you write a book? And I says, I don't know. Who cares what I think? But the reality is I wrote one NYPD book and another one, and I'm up to my ninth book. And it's good therapy for me that I get out the stories and the fun times and the characters that I worked with. And I really enjoy writing.
your book, well, first and foremost, your covers are hilarious and they're so spot on. Who does your book covers? I want the whole series just because of those covers.
I work with a company in Canada. It's for new writers out there. It's ebooklaunch.com. And what I do is I'll think of a title for my book and then I'll explain to them what I want. And they first write me out a sketch and I'll approve that. And then they'll color it in with the fonts and I'll say, no, I want it come more like this, more like that. And we go back and forth. But it's about $600 for an ebook cover and a paper book cover.
Well, they do an amazing
Yeah.
job. And you think about, you know, cops see so much trauma and tragedy and all of that, and yet you manage to make things kind of humorous. How do you do that?
Yeah, so what I try to do is I try to focus on the characters and the funny things that happened during my time on the job. Are there dark moments? Yeah, and I cover that in some of my stories, but for the most part, I try to keep it light and humorous.
Are they autobiographical?
What I do is I'm not disciplined enough to write a novel, beginning, middle, end. So my books, you can just pick it up. There's a chapter with a bunch of subtopics in it. So for argument's sake, in one of my books, I wrote a chapter crossing over to the dark side. So there's stories in there about cops that I work with that went bad, or funny stories, the things that happened down at Times Square during New Year's Eve, things that people see about the NYPD, but they don't know the nuts and bolts and what goes on behind the scenes.
So the NYPD now, as it always is in the media. I mean, you're the
For sure.
largest police department in the country. It's the largest city. You're about to have a new mayor. But you've been through this before. What mayor did you start under?
I started with Ed Koch. So I started in 1987, the tail end of Ed Koch. Koch wasn't a bad guy. Koch, he loved cops. He supported the police, but he really didn't understand crime. And that's when New York City was basically a dump in the 1970s going into the 80s. Then we had the late great David Dinkins, who he was even softer on crime, and that's kind of when New York City went into hell. And New Yorkers tend to vote Democratic, but desperate times called for desperate measures back then. And we got Rudy Giuliani, who was a former federal prosecutor for the Southern District, a former U.S. attorney, and Rudy understood crime and basically took the handcuffs off of us and said, you know what? Go after the quality of life stuff. Pre-Giuliani, if you brought a guy into an NYPD precinct for smoking a joint, a suspended driver's license, a couple of bags of crack in their pocket, the desk officer would tell you, what are you doing? Why are you taking a car off the street? You'd get admonished for that. Sometimes you would get dumped out of a car for that. But what they realized under the Giuliani administration was pulling these guys off the street for what they determined back then is nonsense. This guy's got a warrant. This guy's wanted for a robbery. This guy's wanted for a rape. So we started pulling people off the playing field, and slowly but surely the crime rate dropped. Then came Mike Bloomberg. I don't think he agreed with everything that Rudy did, but he was a businessman and he understood that crime down is good for New York. So he basically kept with the same format. And then I retired. But then, as you can see, Bill de Blasio came in. He basically neutered the police. We got him for 8 years. And then everybody thought it would be a great idea to or vote in an ex-cop, which Eric Adams was no cop. Very divisive, was always in the newspaper about race and how things weren't fair. And I talked to my friends and I was told that he had under 20 arrests in his career. So how do you how are you a policeman, a cop in New York City and have under 20 arrests? So now now we have Mandami coming in, which it's apparently going to get worse.
So I want to go back to the Giuliani days, the 90s crime bill, the broken, you're talking about broken windows
Yes.
policing and CompStat and all that. What we heard, first of all, you guys were the model for the rest of us all around the country. And we embraced, that was some of the safest times. And in fact, I went to New York City when Giuliani was the mayor, and I never felt so safe. I felt way safer there than I did in Chicago. And when you look at that, and then you fast forward, we heard kind of mid Bloomberg that stop and frisk was racist, and you guys were just, you had these jump out cars that you were going into the bad neighborhoods and beating up people of color and this that. Can you explain to people what was really happening and how stop, question, and frisk isn't racist and how it stops crime?
Yeah, well, you brought up Comstat. Comstat was really good for New York in that it identified the dead wood in the NYPD, precinct commanders that really weren't addressing crime, and they forced out a lot of the dead wood. The problem with Comstat is one police plaza got addicted to the crime statistics. So think of Comstat as a form of chemotherapy. Once the patient starts doing better, you don't keep bombing them with radiation. And basically, they got addicted to the crime stats. Well, crime is down. You got to know when to take your foot off the gas and leave the community alone. And they wanted summonses. And now basically, you're going around really, now you're annoying the citizens with this nonsense. And stop, question, and frisk was a great tool because you could stop, question, or possibly frisk somebody. And there was a whole criteria for it. Time of day. If you see somebody at 2 o'clock in the morning hanging around outside a place that's been robbed 15 times, and then someone calls a gun run on the person, you can stop them. You can question them if they make a furtive movement, or if they have a bulge, or if someone's walking and their arm is just kind of glued to their side. They're constantly checking their waist. There's a lot of ways to spot somebody with a gun. So after you stop, question, or possibly frisk this person, you would fill out a form which was called a UF 250. And the UF 250, in theory, was supposed to protect the cop that, yes, I stopped this person because of this, and this. They had a gun. I placed them under arrest. That would go with your arrest paperwork. No gun, you would fill it out and you would file it. And if the person went to make a civilian complaint, it would still go to the Civilian Complaint Review Board, but there would be a form documenting in that day and time why you felt the need to stop this person, stop, question, and possibly frisk them. The NYPD got addicted to the crime stats. And if there was a lot of shootings in a neighborhood, they would flood that neighborhood. And I'm talking with a lot of the NYPD can stop crime like that because there was just so many of us. And I remember they would fly us out to Brooklyn, like say with Comstat. Oh boy, we've got a lot of shootings in these two precincts, and homicides and robberies are up, and there's a lot of guns coming off the street. Okay, let's pull auto crime, let's pull narcotics, let's pull vice, and that we'd be bumping into each other. And at the end of the night, the supervisors, and it wasn't our sergeants or lieutenants, it's coming from one police plaza. Well, how many 250s did you fill out? How many people did you stop? Well, the perps or the bad guys aren't stupid. They see police cars that they haven't seen crisscrossing each other, bumping into each other. Tonight's not the night to do a robbery. Tonight's not the night to do a homicide. So they go inside and they're watching TV. One police plaza says, why aren't no 250s being filled out? Now what happens? Now you got guys stopping people that maybe shouldn't be stopped. And you're annoying the community, and there was a pushback over it. And then they did away with it. But that's on City Hall or One Police Plaza for abusing it.
Well, yeah, there's always going to be bureaucracy is always going to get in the way. And quite frankly, police leadership, once you make that, you get to that certain spot, you unfortunately all around the country, a lot of police leaders forget what is really happening on the street with their cops and with, 30, 40,000 police officers. It's wildly difficult to remember where you came from. I guess. Did you ever work under Ray Kelly?
Twice.
He, I see him do interviews and things like that. He always struck me as kind of a cop's cop.
Not a fan of Little Ray, and I'll tell you why. So people forget, now he's Mr. Law and Order, and now he's like, New York's going to go to hell. And if I was police commissioner, okay. Well, you were police commissioner under the Dinkins administration when we were averaging 2,500 homicides a year and over 150,000 stolen vehicles a year. Where were you, Ray? You were kind of part of the problem. Then all of a sudden, Giuliani kind of got into a pissing match with Bratton and basically forced Bratton out. And then they brought, I don't know if it was Giuliani or Bloomberg that brought Kelly back, but he did make a comeback. And then all of a sudden, with the press loved Ray Kelly because there was never a microphone he didn't like to speak into. So it was kind of self-serving with him with the press. And he's a former Marine, and he looks and acts the part, but he wasn't my favorite police commissioner. I like Bratton, but that's just Coke, Pepsi. That's
Bratton, we love Bratton as well. Where do you think NYPD leadership is heading? Because we've had some crazy stuff happen in the last few years, not just at the commissioner level, but who's been running training, who's running patrol, all of that. Without getting too far into the weeds, what's your gut feeling?
It's awful. It's like one scandal after another. You had one chief who had a female lieutenant under him and allegedly a sex for overtime scandal. You've got the aviation guy that was hooked up to Eric Adams in the administration, the guy running the aviation unit, crashed a helicopter or almost crashed a helicopter and then didn't want to share the records with the FAA. So it's kind of like the Mickey Mouse hour going on over there. And this kind of started just before I retired. They started lowering the standards to become a member of the New York City Police Department. And I remember getting phone calls my last year or two from the applicant investigation unit. And they would say, Detective Ferrari, did you arrest Mike Smith in July of 1992? I said, let me get back to you. I'd find my folders. I go in there and I go, yes, stolen car. And they go, well, he said he was the passenger. And I said, nope, driver, ignition was punched. So they were already trying to get people in just to kind of fill the numbers.
Yeah, in my opinion, as a trainer, and I have trained a lot in New York and New York City, DEI policies have done the NYPD absolutely no good, and it's very frustrating because again, when I started, when you started, the NYPD was one of those agencies we looked to see the best trained, the most squared away cops, and once those DEI policies of, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago really started to take over, that was a real problem, right?
Yeah, you got 3-foot cops, and I'm not a big fan of facial hair for cops. It just looks unprofessional. And the NYPD now has more variations to the uniform than like an NFL team with the throwback jerseys. Back then it was a pair of blue slacks, the blue shirt, and the 8-point hat. Now it's baggy cargo pants and pullovers, and it's too much.
What did no cash bail do to New York City?
Ruined it. It ruined, and I love, there was people sitting on Rikers Island for nonsense. That's so untrue. You've got to be a real pain in the ass and have a million arrests, even if it's nonsense, where the judge finally goes, you know what? Yeah, I get it's a misdemeanor, but this is your 80th shoplifting collar. You're going to Rikers Island. Cashless bail, especially with the borough of Manhattan. So people forget. So New York City's got 5 boroughs, right? And each district attorney's office is run a little different. Manhattan was the crown jewel. Queens was a close second, where if you committed a crime, you were going to jail. Now, the Bronx and Brooklyn was like spin the wheel. It was like going to the circus. And Staten Island, that's its own entity. But with cashless bail, it basically ruined the borough of Manhattan because all these guys, they lowered the population of Rikers Island, and you've got all these street people committing all these crimes.
So we look at what's happening now. We've got a mayor-elect who is a admitted Democrat socialist. Yeah. He's talked about defunding the police. He has called the NYPD some of the most horrific things that you can think of. Is there going to be, in your opinion, this mass exodus of the NYPD that everybody's talking about?
Yes and no. I think the old timers and people with time in are going to bide their time. They want their pension. If you vest out, leave early, you're not going to get the same. I'm sure there's going to be a large percentage looking for jobs in other states. I think they'll probably, under Mandabi, depending on how much he runs his mouth or what he does, you could see at 5 to 10% exodus, in the first 6 months. But it'll, people still need to work. So it'll level off, but it just depends on how radical. I mean, he got elected. Let's just see if he pulls back on the throttle or he goes full in with this nonsense.
The NYPD works a lot with other agencies. I mean, you guys have, so many task forces, we couldn't even begin to name them. You work with the feds, you work with the state, you work with, everybody and their brother. Plus, there's that international element. You've got the United Nations there. You've got, there's just so much happening. How is you look at the last 10 years, let's say, how has that affected, just everything that's happening in New York City? How does that affect those task force relationships?
I'm sure there's been a lot of head scratching and a lot of because so with a federal case, it probably wouldn't affect it so much with a federal prosecutor. But now, like the borough of Manhattan, like we just said, we're under Bragg with cashless bail. And so different, again, different boroughs give you different things. Like it would be next to impossible to get a wiretap in the Bronx. The DA's office say, yeah, that's great case. Just give us a little bit more. Give us a little bit more. And they would never give you a wiretap. Manhattan, you could go up on a wire like that if you had probable cause. I'm sure that a lot of this nonsense has stymied a lot of cases on the state level, probably not the federal.
Let me switch gears and then you'll see the method to my madness. Where were you on 9/11/01?
I was sitting in my office, but I was actually supposed to be in the courthouse a couple of blocks away, but my sergeant was running late. So I was in the Bronx, but I was down there walking around by about 1:30 in the afternoon.
And so you not only experienced that, but then you experienced the aftermath of 9/11/01, where every cop in the country, but especially you guys, were revered, right? Everybody wanted to wear an NYPD hat, and everybody's buying your lunch and your coffee and thanking you and all that stuff. Um, have New Yorkers forgotten?
They forgot 15 minutes after. It's funny. I always tell the story like the first week we were down there. We're in Manhattan, we're going back up to the Bronx. So we're taking the West Side Highway and the air conditioner broke. We were in a minivan and the air conditioner wasn't working. And it was like an Indian summer. So it was still warm out. So we had the cargo door open on the minivan and we're going up the West Side Highway and people are cheering us. Right. So we're like, look at that. We've never been cheered before. We got up to the Bronx. We got cut off by a gypsy cab and the guy started cursing at us before he realized we're the police. I go, well, we're scumbags again, like 15 minutes later.
It didn't stop. So when you look at that, you look at the risk, the constant risk of terrorism and radical jihadism in New York City. What happens when a guy like Zoran Mandami, who does have some friends, let's say, who does talk about jihad, who doesn't seem to be a big fan of the United States of America, what's going to happen when the mayor gets their hands on every single database and everything, right? Am I right about that?
Yeah, he's talking about doing away with the NYPD's gang database. Says we don't need it. They're going to wipe it clean. So, it's his ball, his game, but let's not forget Eric Adams was doing a lot of things and the feds gave him a touch. Right? He was on a plane going to Washington D.C. to complain to Biden about the illegals, which he thought was okay, and then it wasn't okay. And then all of a sudden people start getting indicted and in his administration and search warrants are being served. And then Trump came in and basically gave him a pass. I think this guy is going to do the same thing. I think he's going to run it. It just depends. If he goes in there running his mouth, he needs he needs Trump for money. New York City needs federal money to survive because it's mismanaged. So I think he could get himself in trouble. Depending on his background, maybe he gets pulled off the playing field. You never know how this is going to turn out, but he talks a tough game. And you're right. I mean, he is wired in with the Muslim community, and one of his supporters was an unindicted co-conspirator of the 93 World Trade Center truck bomb. So to me, it looks a little dangerous with him at the controls.
You spent 20 years at the NYPD. Am I correct in assuming that the vast majority of New York City police officers are going to continue to do their job, love their city, protect their community, no matter who's the mayor?
It's already changed from the time I left. I left in 2007. Basically, cops nowadays, most cops are not afraid of getting killed. They're afraid of getting in trouble. And what you're creating, or what they've created, is you've got cops that are not doing their jobs. They're not thinking outside the box. They're report takers. They're not looking to stop a crime before it happens. They're going to show up 15 minutes later and take a report and go, oh, we'll see what we can do. And that's happening in a lot of major U.S. cities right now. Part of it is generational. Different, young people think differently. They weren't under the same conditions that we were brought up in. I really worry about major U.S. cities with policing.
Yeah, I think you're spot on about that. Vic, I have about 40 more questions, but we're out of time. Where can people find you, your books, and find out more about you? You do a lot of podcasts, and people need to hear from you. Where can they find you?
Well, my podcast is called the NYPD Through the Looking Glass NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast. It's on YouTube and wherever else you can find podcasts. I bring on retired cops and NYPD members, and we talk about different cases. My books, just go to Amazon, type in my name, Vic Ferrari, like the car, where you can preview all my NYPD books for free. And if you want to reach out to me for an interview or got a question, you can find me on Twitter or Instagram at VicFerrari50.
Vic, I cannot thank you enough for spending time with us today. This has been such an enlightening conversation. And if you'd like more information about the National Police Association, you can visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Every day, the brave men and women of law enforcement put their lives on the line to keep us safe. But they need our help to continue their mission. Activist politicians, progressive prosecutors, the ACLU, and the rest of the anti-police forces receive millions in donations from extremist pro-criminal elements like George Soros and woke corporations. The National Police Association is fighting them in courts around the country, including the United States Supreme Court, defending officers who are being attacked for doing their jobs. Additionally, the National Police Association works year-round to pass tough-on-crime legislation to put and keep criminals behind bars. Consider going to nationalpolice.org and donating to keep us in the fight. Together we can win. That is nationalpolice.org.